Yeah, we've been going 17 years and we love it. You gotta understand the system. It's not a great investment.
Well, if I could have everyone's attention, please. Good afternoon. Welcome to this joint work session of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the Germantown Municipal School District. We have some agendas that have made their way around. We welcome all of the board members from the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and from our friends at the school district. We also welcome those that are in attendance from the public, and just a few reminders of work sessions here at the city. City work sessions really are truly that. They're information gathering and information sharing. There are no motions or proposals or actions taken during work sessions here at the city. And with that said, we'd just like to say that we're always eager to have our friends at the school district with us. We've probably met more than a half dozen times over the last 3 or 4 years in joint meetings, and they've always been productive and very meaningful. And so with that said, we have an agenda. We have several board members, not sure from the school board, but I know from the Board of Mayor and Aldermen that have meetings either at 4 or 4:30, and so we're going to stick with an agenda. We have that, and we'll move through it very quickly so there can be some discussion as well. First on the agenda is capital improvements process and projects from the city. That will be our city administrator, Patrick Long.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to talk primarily about the CIP. The board has seen the budget. Board of Mayor and Aldermen has seen the budget on numerous occasions, work sessions, first reading on the budget. Monday night on the 11th, I'll do the entire presentation on the budget, much like I did during the work session on the budget in late April, early May. But I want to focus tonight or this afternoon talking about the capital improvements plan. And the way the city prepares its capital improvements plan, and I think this is helpful for the school board, is that we do a 5-year capital improvements plan, actually a 6-year capital improvements plan. The board appropriates funding for each fiscal year. So what the Board of Mayor and Aldermen will approve as they adopt the budget will be funding for the CIP in this first year, FY19. The preparation of our capital improvements budget is based upon a set of financial policies that are adopted by this body, Board of Mayor and Aldermen, and we adhere to that policy in terms of what we have for debt service, what we use for reserves, and so that really drives the development of our capital improvements plan. And mentioned several times in the policy document regarding the CIP is we will issue debt to finance long-lived capital and operating assets for the city as well as the school district within the constraints maintaining or improving bond ratings and debt service quality and payments. As you all know, we are the only city in the state with a AAA bond rating from Standard & Poor's and Moody's, and that's not by accident. And our financial policies adhere to that and address that and make sure that we, when we're looking at debt, that we also take into consideration the long-range financial impact of issuing debt and what it might do for but to our bond rating and future generations as well. So there's 2 basic approaches that we take when we look at issuing debt. One is something called pay as you use. And pay as you use, and again, I'm looking at our financial policies, pay as you use is when we take money out of reserves, excess revenues or expenditures that have accumulated over time, and we use those dollars to fund out of current current revenues, capital projects during that 5-year period of time. But keep in mind also what is contained in our financial policies, there are certain restricted reserves that we have to maintain in terms of debt service for the following year, a third of the property tax for the following year, emergencies and catastrophes. So when you look at the reserves, you've got to understand that not all of that is available just for capital. So we have to be very careful that we maintain those required fund balance levels. So that's pay as you go. Pay as you use means borrowing funds to finance future capital projects. That's the issuance of bonds. Those are the debt instruments that we have. And again, when we issue debt, we want to make sure that we're not going to do anything that would violate the city's AAA bond rating, not only because it is a responsible thing to do, but it's also contained in our financial policies. It guides those decisions as we look at issuing debt. So again, we developed a capital improvements plan to cover a 6-year planning period, but the board and their when they adopt the budget, appropriate funds for only one fiscal year at a time. So when we're looking at issuing debt and issuing bonds, we want to be very careful with that because we're committing future generations. And so our financial policies also speak to the fact that pay as you go, the use of reserves to fund capital projects, should be our #1 option. We need to exhaust that first and then look at debt issuance to come in and supplement what we're doing out of reserves. There's no saying, I think Mr. Parker remember this, Germantown can do anything it wants to do, it just can't do everything. And so these financial policies are in place to really control what we do and how we spend our money wisely, not only today, but for future generations. So then when we're looking at debt, we're looking at debt that is going to be there in terms of the life of the asset, 20 years or 30 years, whatever that might be. And when we issue debt, we also look at projects that fit the requirement for debt issuance. In other words, Mr. Gavin, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe a project that a policy states that has a useful life of at least 10 years and a minimum value of $3 million. So anything under that, we're going to look at issuing or using the pay-as-you-go means or the use of our reserves. And again, we look at these capital projects to make sure that as we look 5 years, that our budget is balanced, that when we talk about our tax rate, we can make sure that that's going to last during that period of time. And that again, that we're maintaining the highest credit rating that we possibly can. So during the budget process, there's an evaluation that takes place. So I asked the department heads back in late December, January, we announced the budget process. This body adopts, the Board of Mayor and Alderman adopt the budget calendar, and then the fund begins. So the department heads will submit their capital projects, and this year they submitted 45 projects. 45 capital projects were submitted citywide to look at city capital needs. And that totaled just over $36 million for funds requested. And then we begin to look at that and say, okay, what can we fund out of reserves? First, remember to pay as you go. And then where can we look at bond issues? Strategically planned bond issues that support the rest of the needs for the city. So we looked at those capital projects, and there's a capital improvements team that's put in place, city employees that reviews and ranks all the applications. And there are 17 things that they look at, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of these. So when they're looking at capital projects, they're going to look at things that conform to the city's long-range strategic plan, Germantown Forward 2030. They're going to look at things that promote safety and security. This year we're looking at the design for the new fire station. Fire Station 3 was submitted, and it was up earlier in the fiscal year, up earlier in the 5-year planning period. Fire Station number 2 was submitted. It was up earlier in the 5-year planning period. At the end of the day, as an example, as we try to balance these things, Fire Station 2 got pushed out. And we know it's one of those projects that, if we have a major earthquake, it's probably not going to stand. Fire Station 3 replacement, it's an old station, we had to push that out a couple of years as well. So another area that we look at in terms of funding, the criteria, what are the requirements to meet federal or state mandates? Is there something we have to address now with our capital dollars to look at that, to address those possible mandates? We also look at impacts to future operating costs, because these capital projects, it's just not a one-time expense that you build it and it stays there. You have to factor in terms of the operating budget, all the long-term operating costs associated with it as well. We will also look at those projects that support our economic base, or things that we can do to help add to the tax base in our community, whether it's commercial or residential, to help support that. So those are just a few of the areas that the CIP team looks at. And so during the process, as I mentioned, 45 projects were identified at just over $36 million. During the whole 5-year planning period, 85 projects were identified. So staff, again, not only looks at what could happen in the current fiscal year, but we also look long range at the needs during that 5-year planning period. There were 85 projects that were submitted close to $7 million in funding requested for those projects. Now, we know we can't do all of those things, so let's just focus on FY19. Again, of the 36 million or 45 projects, we were able to identify 27 projects out of that 45. So there were a ton of projects that 40% of the projects that were requested in FY19 did not make the city's list in terms of what we could afford. And these are all worthwhile projects. 27 of the,
I'm sorry, but does that 45, that includes the items that included for the school? So everything that we would have submitted as well?
not at this point. I'm gonna get to that, okay?
This is city, this number one
Yeah.
is city.
Yeah. And so,
Right, which would include the schools though. And I think that's just one thing as we're going through this, is just to think about, because I agree with you, the process that we have with the city. But 4 years ago, we took over the schools and the facilities, and so I think as we're going through this process, is it's not just this first year, but it's also the ongoing of how we, you know, as we look at our process, does it need to change in any way because of the significance of the facilities of the schools that were added that 5 years ago didn't exist in the city's purview?
let me finish. Yes, those projects are in there.
In the 45?
They came about, no, they weren't in 45 initially, they're in the 27 projects. And after Mr. Manuel's done, I had Jason Heisman and Jason Manuel talk about how we were able to incorporate a number of the capital projects in the district within that budget. So,
But our projects did not go through your process of the 45 that you just described, where you went through the 17?
not in January, no.
Okay, okay.
But we're down to 27, and in that 27, the total projects to be funded in FY19 is $28,100,000, and that does include the projects that we talked about to be addressed with the district in FY19, primarily the boiler system, and there's also dollars in there we identified transfer out of reserves if it goes forward to support the field house project. We've identified $200,000 a year to support that project as the city's commitment or contribution to that. So the total funds from reserves, again, this is not bond issues, this is just reserves. These are excess revenues over expenditures built in. They're reserves that we can draw upon without violating any of the city's financial policies in terms of contingencies, money back for property taxes, dollars back for debt service. So the total amount being funded out of reserves, which includes $1.5 million in 19 and $1.5 million in FY20 with the boiler system, the total amount is $12.3 million. Okay, so that's all funds. That $12 million would include the utility fund, the Germantown Athletic Club, general fund. So let's just focus on the general fund projects. So there were 37 projects initially submitted from the general fund reserves. As you know, we've got several funds. The general fund is the largest of the fund for most of the capital where it comes from. The total projects that we are anticipating doing in FY19 is 21 projects, or 57% of that. So the total general fund projects is $23,417,000, and that's being funded out of a combination of state grants that we received primarily for a lot of our road work and what have you. There was no bond issue planned in FY19. We have 3 bond issues. Remember I said we look at pay-as-you-go first. We have 3 bond issues strategically planned during the 5-year planning period or 6-year planning period in FY20, 22, and 24. There was not a bond issue proposed in FY19, primarily because of the reasons I just mentioned. When we look at our debt capacity, when we look at building a budget and a financial plan that's financially responsible, we don't need another bond issue at FY19. That's the administration's recommendation. So, coming out of general fund reserves, okay, again, the excess revenue. The total general fund projects is 23.4. Coming out of general fund reserves is $7.8 million in FY19 coming out of reserves. Again, that doesn't include the utility fund or the athletic club. Coming straight out of reserves, general fund reserves is 7.8. Included in that 7.8 million is 1.7 million that we identified in working with Mr. Manuel, Mr. Cappy, to begin the replacement of the boilers at Riverdale at 1.5, and the other 200,000 is what we would transfer assuming there is some type of agreement put together to do the field house. That would be the city's $200,000 commitment over a 5-year period of time. That's where we are in our capital budget. I can go through projects, but the Board of Mayor and Aldermen has copies of all the capital projects that have been approved at first reading and approved by the Financial Advisory Commission. So, Mayor, at this point, I'll throw it over to Mr. Mann to talk about what the district is
Just one
doing.
point of clarification. So just to make sure what you just said is that of all the projects that Mr. Manuel will go through that we have on our list, what is currently included in the city's budget for capital improvements is 1.5 for the Riverdale boiler and 200,000 for the field house. There are no other items in the budget for capital improvement that relates to the schools.
Remember what I said, we do a 6-year planning.
But I'm just saying for this current next year upcoming.
Well, but the other, I need to talk about what's happening in this
Okay,
one.
okay.
Because the Riverdale boilers is a $3 million project.
That's right.
So we're doing 1.5 in 19 we've identified.
Right.
And when the board considers and adopts the budget in FY '20, we'll have the other 1.5 million to do the project at that time. We're gonna work with Mr. Cathy and company to plan this project of construction so it happens late in our fiscal year, so we'll be able to line up the 3 million. The other thing that we've identified in FY '20, again, we do a long-range 5-year capital plan to make sure that the city's financial resources are intact, we're not jeopardizing the bond rating, we're adhering to our adopted financial policies, is $5 million. That's the bond issue I mentioned in 20. We're going to do bond issue in 20, 22, and 24. The bond issue in 20 will be to help address the school, the possible expansion at Houston Middle. This is your business. We're looking for you all to tell us when that's going to happen. Originally, we were thinking 23 or 24, and I think you all thought that same thing as well. At least that's what we thought. But after looking at your growth rate and what's happening, we are prepared in FY '20 to issue debt for $5 million to take care of the expansion at Houston Middle School.
But in your plan, it would not be feasible to move that up a year.
No.
One item that may have not have been, it's not in capital, but it is part of the road work at Forest Hill Irene Road, that we're doing all of the improvement along the frontage of the new school, and we're absorbing that cost. I don't think we actually have a price tag on it, but it should be several $100,000. So that's not in the capital specifically earmarked for schools, but that's something that we're doing as our great partnership. Go ahead, continue.
Just a comment, on terms of no, my answer no.
Yes.
We're looking for the district to provide us direction on when is the need, when is it time to go with bondage into the bond market to fund that school. Originally, it was 23, 24 is what we were talking about, but things change and things can change rapidly. So we're prepared in FY '20 to be able to issue a bond for $5 million to do that addition at that point in time.
But not earlier than that.
Right.
Okay.
But again, that's based on what we're hearing, what we, city administration, our conversations with our peers on the GMSD administration, when that could possibly come online.
So if we feel like we would need it in 2019, then we should ask, and then you would let us know if it's feasible. Is that fair to say?
We'd have to run back through the entire capital plan. And one thing I would say, if we add projects, the way this thing is structured and how tight as it is during the 5-year planning period, something's gonna have to give somewhere. Because we're talking about adding debt service payments. It's one thing to issue the debt, but you still have, Adrian probably knows, 150, 200,000 in debt service payments that's gonna come off the top in terms of operations. And we were in the market last year. We want to work very
Yeah, I'm not,
closely.
yeah, I'm not telling you, I'm just saying, should we ask? It sounds like what we should do is tell you what we truly need and when we need it. And then you can advise us, maybe that's not feasible. Could you hold a year on that? Because it'd be better for us to get a market in this year. That'd be some
That's
discussion.
always the case.
Well, and that's-
We were at 2023 for this originally, heard I heard in the meetings that I met with school board members that there was a greater need, and so it has been moved up at least 2 years. And so if, we always want to hear from our school board if that is a crushing need, but that's not what we discussed at our FAC when that was presented.
Well,
So
why don't
if
we
this
let
is,
does our superintendent go through?
Okay, well, first of all, I think it's important to talk about the why, and I think everyone realizes the importance of education and its impact on property values in the city and the success that we've had in our school district. So,
Well, wait just a minute, because I don't think Suzanne ever got clarification on what is actually being budgeted for in FY19. I know we jumped to FY20, but I'd just like to get some clarification about that and confirm. I think we're only budgeting right now $1.5 million for the boiler and the $200,000. Is that correct?
Yep.
And 19.
And when we say 19, we mean fiscal year 18 to 19,
Well,
right?
it's
term-
fiscal year 19, it
Okay,
ends in
okay.
19, it's called fiscal year 19.
And in fiscal year 20, when you're saying that you're going out to bond, is that the year 2020 or
No,
fiscal year 20 that starts 2019?
FY20.
So that would be, you could go to bond.
This time next year, we will be working with the finance committee to structure a bond to go out, I don't know, we'll time it up with the administration, the school administration. And we'll back up from when you all want to break ground at that point, assuming that is still a request,
Right.
assuming
And
that you're
that's-
saying the demand is still there.
And that's in addition to also the 1.5 million to finish
The boiler.
project.
Right.
And Patrick, just for the sake of everybody in the room, it might help for them to know how the decision was made about which CFP projects were approved for the school. The aldermen weren't included in the decision in front. So basically, the administration was given the presentation, I think, from 2 members of the school board, and then the administration brings those proposals to the aldermen after they've kind of reviewed and decided what project should go forward. But in my opinion, as an alderman, I would like to have the administration present all of their proposal and then us go through as a board and decide which projects should really be placed at the top of the list going forward, because as the legislative branch, we may disagree with the administrative branch about what projects should actually be funded. And maybe we can go through some of that today and make changes at our next budget year.
Did you say administration met with school board members?
Well, at our last budget meeting, I think we said Mr. Heisman met with.
Not with school board members, with school administration.
Oh, what, was Ms. Landers not there? Okay, so it was just Mr. Heisman and Mr. Manuel that made the decision.
Well, let me back up in terms of making decisions. Let's keep in mind the city's budget, which the school district's budget is a component of it. The school district, the city's budget per the charter, up until the time I hand it to the board of mayor and aldermen, is the city administrator's budget. I'm building this budget with my department heads, with our financial advisory commission. We have work sessions on the CIP with the board of mayor and aldermen, and we did. That would have been the time to say, well, what about this project, this project, this project, in terms of priority? What you got a month ago was the city administrator's budget, and in that includes these capital projects that I identified and talked about. I don't poll the board members to say, what about this project, what about that project? We base those projects that are submitted upon what the professional department heads around this table say, and what my office in budget and performance can say we can afford. This will not jeopardize the financial future of the city. This will not jeopardize our AAA bond rating. Again, we can do anything, we can't do everything. The process, that is the process, and that's what makes it work in our form of government, is administration presents a budget. We are in that process now. It's not, give me your project, let's add them to it. These come from staff. This comes from the city administrator's budget. Now, as soon as Mr. Manuel's done.
So I'll go through, and we'll go through how we got to.
But I want to get
because
to,
our
I
board,
want to get
because
to
our board
Alder
did
ask
work
this
and then we
question
did.
about how those other projects
Right.
got in. Let me say this, after looking at the CIP and talking with Mayor Palazzolo, we felt it was important that we sit down, staff sit down with our peers in district administration and identify those capital projects so we can put them in. We do 5-year financial planning. We do a 5-year CIP. You all have a facilities master plan, which is a little bit different. We wanted to dig into that and see what we could bring forward into the capital project and begin to fund. At the beginning of the budget process, we did not intend to issue debt during the 5-year planning period. When we went to the market last year, some of you may recall me saying, you know what, it'd be nice if we didn't issue debt during this 5-year planning period. But looking at your all's needs, looking at our Parks Master Plan, looking at other things we need to do, staff, budget performance, we went back and said, okay, let's look at the use of reserves. Let's do the 5-year financial plan we do. Let's keep our fund balance healthy. Can we issue additional debt during that period of time and still maintain the financial integrity of the city and our AAA rating? So that We went back and added those bond issues. I'm going to take the whole aisle, so Ms. Lane.
Go ahead, Jason.
Back to where we were. Okay, so let's talk about some of the highlights that we've had from this past year. So first of all, it was our third year in a row to have the highest ACT average of the district. It was a 25.5. But just so you understand where we came from and the strategic goals for our school board, when we started actually it wasn't when we started 14-15, but in 2015, 2016, 74.4% of our students were scoring over a 21 on the ACT. In our second year, our goal set by the board was to increase 2% every single year. That went up to 80.5%. Just to give you a typical, the common percentage across the state is to be around 40 to 50% scoring this on tests. So this is exceptional. And this past year, we were up to 83.1%, and our goal was to be at 48%. So just on the number of students scoring over a 21 on the ACT, we have knocked that out of the park. But we have an even more detailed strategic measure. We want to know how they're scoring on all 4 tests, all 4 benchmarks. So there's a science section, there's an English section, there's a math section, and a reading section. So know that when we, in 2015, 2016, when our strategic plan started, 44% of our students were hitting all 4 metrics. In year 2 of the strategic plan, 2016, 2017, that went to 49.7. Our goal was 46%. When we got to year 3 this past year, it was up to 56.7% of our students hitting all 4 test areas. That's why you see that overall cumulative average. So the reason that we're talking about this plan, the reason we're doing this is because education is important. It's important to the property values. It's important to people moving here. One of the reasons they're choosing to come to Germantown is because of the schools. But also when we look at the number of scholarships, we have a record year, 34.6 million.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think some people are going to have to leave. Is there any way we can come back to this
I'm going
in case
quick.
people
I'm going, yes.
leave?
Yes. So same thing with literacy. Know that our literacy in our kindergarten and our first grade classes have gone from, and this is the same cohort of students, 81.6% to 97.2%. So I'm just giving brief highlights of why this is important. So across all grade bands, know that we value your support and we think it's important for you to fund school. So we'll go quickly through. Number 1, high school, according to Memphis Business Journal.
There it goes, okay.
19-year consecutive best approach. It doesn't matter what you're looking at. Athletics, academics, arts, we're doing it. STEM 1-to-1. All students 6 through 12 are getting computer devices. So we're making priority for funding. The Riverdale expansion won awards from the Memphis Business Journal. So know that this building that we built was recognized as being exceptional. So now here's where we're getting to the why and how we chose those things. So thank you for your patience. New elementary school coming on. Why was it important to fund this? Why did we ask the city to go for this $27 million they're giving for us? It has to do with our capacity. Know that the new school is going to fund at optimal capacity 739 plus students, at maximum capacity over 815 students. So we do not see a need at the elementary school grade band. That new school has all the features that we see, whether we're talking about art rooms, and you can keep on.
I don't know why. Yeah, sorry.
You've seen these in previous presentations. Art rooms, activity rooms, security check-ins, class storage, media center, and all this is online. Gymnasium similar to Riverdale. So know that this new facility is going to have an exceptional impact on our district and our grade bands. But that has only solved the problem at the elementary school grade bands. Know that we still see other concerns and challenges for the district. So let's talk about where we ended with enrollment. So when we look at the demographers, why were we talking about when we need the middle school expansion being in 2024-25? That's because that was the highest point based on the demographers' projection of our middle school capacity. Now, knowing that we are seeing increased growth above and beyond the demographers, so know that when we look across all 3 grade bands, our highest year was 2021-22. That's okay. I know it's sensitive. So here's just a breakdown of what's the impact per grade band when we look across all grade levels. So the reason we say elementary has been satisfied is because once this comes online and we add all the capacities together, whether we're talking about optimal or maximum capacities, we have room for growth. And so that was something that's important to us. So when we talk about the maximum number of students, that as the city begins to grow, we can hold 743 students. If our school board chooses to use optimal capacities, we would have an additional 438 students that we could have come to our schools as the city grows and expands. So let's talk about how good was the demographer? How good was his projection this past year? So these are new numbers.
So if you compare it to other studies, know these were the end of the year school numbers. It's probably going to be one of the only times I'll use this because starting in August, we're going to start with brand new numbers for new enrollment. But know that our demographer was projecting 442 students at Riverdale in grades 6 through 8, and that includes not residents and not residents. That was part of the study. We saw 468 students there. We saw some growth in the Riverdale school zone. When we talk about Houston Middle School, he was projecting, I'm sorry, that's me. You want it back?
Don't touch the screen.
Yes. I wasn't even close.
It's
It's very sensitive. Okay. He was talking about 960, he projected 969 students. We were actually lower than that at Houston Middle School. We ended the year with 958 students. That includes residents and non-residents at Houston Middle School. But if you look at where the demographer projects that we're going to hit our high years, the highest year still is 2024, 2025. So for us, that's why we want to come online sooner, because right now we are at our capacity. We're above our thresholds. And you'll see that later on. So there are capacity concerns. If we just take, and this is just for residents and the employee transfers, this does not include the current non-residents that we have. Just taking those students into account, we are 12 students over our maximum capacities at our middle school grade band. 86 students if we look in the optimal capacity. And how are we able to do that? Because we're teaching out of areas that weren't designed for permanent instruction. We're teaching out of the science labs. We're teaching out of rooms that are full every single period of the day. We are offering speech services and side rooms, areas that are smaller and weren't really designed for that purpose. So we're making do, but know that we're above those capacities. So one of the things that we had to take into consideration when we're talking about when do we go to bond for the expansion at Houston Middle School is how quickly is this going to come and how quickly do we see the growth? So know that right now when we look at, and we have a ratio of our average number of students per the households, and that includes apartments and single-family households in the city of Germantown, we're looking at a 0.31 ratio across the whole city. But we wanted to be sure that we were making the right assumptions because we wanted to double-check the demographer and see, do we see something greater with multifamily houses or apartments? Is there a different ratio? The actuality is, when we look at all the apartments and lots, the number of single-family units compared to the number of students, it's a 0.27 ratio. But we want to be conservative in our estimate because those are so close. So know that when we are looking at build-out in the city of Germantown, we're trying to project, if we have that 0.31 ratio, how many students are going to be created at each grade band. So know that we've taken that into consideration. Now, I know that Mr. Heisman has been working hard with departments from the city to really look at the impact on multifamily houses in the city. So I know that y'all have a lot more updated information than what we have done from the district. This was the district's study of this, so know that they have updated this information. But know that we looked at every parcel of land that is not developed in the city, and we did a projection of how many students are going to be created from each parcel in the city. And that's why we have the different color codes. So if you see, for example, if we look at single-family households, there were 397 lots that were currently approved at that time. We did the 0.31 projection, and that's how we came up with the number of students produced per grade band. So know that we would be looking at 57 K through 5 students, 28.5 6 through 8 students, and 38 9 through 12 students. So that's just what had been approved. When we look at the multifamily units that had been approved before the moratorium, know that we did the same thing. We used that 0.31 ratio to calculate how many students were produced from each one. So know that using that same percentage, 0.31, and looking at all those units, Carter, Thornwood, Verdian, and I think it's watermark under there, we were looking at 148 K through 5 students. We were looking at 74 6 through 8 students and 98 9 through 12 students. So we were doing the projections to see how soon do we need this. And we need to work with the city and talk about, as they're approving developments, as they're looking at residences coming online, so that we can do our prediction and track that growth. That's an important part of the process. So we also looked at lots that we are saying weren't available. We had the benefit of, when we were doing the school site analysis, we actually called all of these landowners to say, are you interested in selling your property to us for a school site? There are some that are in trust and they have no desire to sell their properties. Those are these properties here. That doesn't mean that they couldn't change in the future and decide that they want to sell their property, but at the time that we were looking for a new school site, these people had no intention of selling. So like the horse farm, they wanted to keep it a horse farm forever. The pony farm, over there off of Papa Pike, they said they don't ever want it to not be a pony farm. That's part of their trust. So know that we did talk to these individuals. So we did not project students from those lots. And then there were lots that are just open, vacant lots that people own. And so we looked at the zoning for those lots to determine how many units could be on there, and we did our same calculation. So we did a backwards design to say, if we have 4 units, 4 lots available on that property, how many students would that produce? So know that looking at the 512 available lots on the books, we were projecting 73.2 K through 5 students, 36 6 through 8 students, and 48 9 through 12 students. So we've tried to add to the demographer's plan to see what is the build out, how is that going to impact the schools that we have and our populations, because we want to make sure that we have room for all that doesn't impact instruction. So notice, here are the categories. So I'm trying to go quickly through all of this. These are the students that are currently enrolled with our employees' children that are on transfers. It doesn't include any other non-residents in the city. We have the McKibben's projection. That's his growth based on the age differential in the city. So he looks at when people are going to sell their houses to younger families and predicts when we're going to see a transition. The red, the yellow, and the purple are the ones that you just saw where we were looking at available properties in the city and trying to determine the number of students. So know that this chart is a projection of the complete build out of the city of Germantown. Some of these numbers may never hit because people may decide that they're not selling their properties. It may be 5 years from now, it may be 10, it could be 4 is depending on how quickly development happens. But know that when we add all these numbers up and we compare it to our capacities in our school, we do see needs. So for example, I said, elementary school level, we are very thankful for the partnership to get that elementary school completed. It takes care of a need. We are going to remove all the portables at our schools. So know that, and it provides for the future. So even when the city's developed, we can accommodate 64 additional students, counting all this growth, or 369 if we're looking at maximum capacity. So we have room for even more students at our schools at the elementary school grade band. That is not the case for middle school. So when we look at middle school capacity, like I said, we are already at our breaking point for middle school capacity. But no, once again, this is a complete build out of the city. So currently we had, when this was done, we had 1,294 residents and employees, children. And in August, we will update all of these numbers with new enrollments as the students are coming. We dramatically cut transfers, so you should see some relief at our schools. But here are the numbers of build out, and know that we are beyond capacity right now. That's why the house is already full. But know that how could we accommodate in the future if we see all of this growth? We would have to look at portables. We would have to look at some way to accommodate that growth.
Well, and I think it would be fair to say too, Jason, don't you think, is that even if we don't have that growth coming, we're at the max,
We're
we're
at
above
the-
the max. And
point.
so we need to do something, whether it's portables, whether it's an addition, but we can only teach in,
So if
Yeah.
if we see future numbers, we are already using spaces and impacting instruction like science labs that they have a teacher who's assigned permanently to that teacher lab. So when other classes want to use it, she has to rotate out, they have to
Right.
rotate in. So know that we are having impacts, but yes, future growth, we are going to have to do something with that. And there are lots of things that we can try to do to accommodate, which we did at our other schools, whether we're talking about portables, whether we're talking about the grade structure at the new elementary school. There are things that we can do to try to accommodate those growth periods. But know that we do see a middle school concern. The challenge is going to be when can we build that and when does it come online? So let's talk briefly about capital improvement projects, and I'll go fast through this. Know that we do also have a very detailed process for our 5-year facilities strategic plan. Fleming Architecture Firm was hired. I think it cost $60,000 that was appropriated by the Shelby County Commission for this study. The reason that things are put in certain years is based on when they're going to run out or when they're going to break. So we're talking about roofs. We're talking about HVAC units. That's how they came up with this study. Now, there are things that are on here because of growth or because of desires of the district that we have added additional, but know that most of these are based on their year. So, for example, when they talk about boilers, they're talking about the hot water heaters in the schools. There's a lifespan for those, and they have to replace those at certain points. So that's how we came up with this 5-year list. Our board also identified the 3 major projects this year that were most important to them. So know that these were already completed, but know that we talked about security at our schools. We talked about the boiler system. being a priority. We talked about field house. We had a list of those, but I'll go through.
We'll get there.
Yes, we're getting there. What we've already completed, and we are thankful to the partnership to the city, know that we've already made huge investments in our schools. So the city gave us $1 million. We have put in $800,000 to Dogwood Elementary. So now you can see the breakdown that we've invested over $1.8 million, almost $1.9 million at Dogwood for roof, HVACs. We have done a lot of projects, and you can see the breakdown of the funding source. Farmington Elementary, we have invested $2 million for modular classrooms, window replacements, HVAC ceiling replacements, ceiling tile and grid. They painted the school. They've added new carpet. So there have been dramatic improvements at Farmington. Houston Middle School, which is one of our newer campuses, that's why this was less, but know that we've invested in repaving, new gym floor, new carpets, but it's been a smaller amount, $224,000 at Houston Middle School. And we funded 100% of that. And then Houston High School, we've invested over $4.8 million in that television studio, new roof, new HVAC units, cafeteria paving, lighting repair, auditorium and sidewalks. And then there's a partnership with private donors and also with the city and the school district to fund the Jumbotron and the turf field. And I know that seems like that's something that we thought was extra, that wasn't a requirement, but we were losing the practice space under the power lines because of the lateral G. So we needed a place for our band to practice, for our football to practice. So know that it wasn't just because we wanted a turf field, it was something that was necessary for the district. So we're thankful for that partnership. Riverdale, one of our higher numbers, we've invested over $12 million there because of the new addition. We removed all the portables behind Riverdale. You can see the breakdown of how it was funded. $7 million from the city, over $5 million from GMSD. And then, of course, the new elementary school, the city went to bond for $27 million for that facility, and we were in at 4.7, and you can see the site plan. So, on our current list for this fiscal year, but I do have this list for you if you don't already have it, so I can give it to you, but know that we were focusing on fiscal year 18, what we could accomplish, and the things that the board had talked about and that they said they were making a priority. We have another chance for a partnership with private donors, with the city, with the school district, and that was for the field house. So know that that was something that the school district had talked about. The Riverdale boiler and chiller systems. Dogwood ADA upgrades, which replaces the bathrooms and changes the size of the stall, so you have plumbing changes for those ADA upgrades. There are other projects that we are also completing. So when you look at the bottom, Houston High School painting is being completed this summer. The Farmington ceiling, tile, and grid is being completed this summer. That does leave some project LED lighting upgrades at the schools, at all schools, and Houston High School boiler replacement. But know that the Riverdale boiler chiller system replacement also replaces the lighting. So we are taking care of one of those schools when we replace the lighting there.
And
So-
Jason, just to make sure we're apples and apples.
Yes.
This fiscal year 18 correlates to what they're talking about fiscal year 19.
This was their fiscal year 18. So our years do correlate with each other. So these were previous. The boiler, we are taking care of these things right now. The
What,
new
you
elementary
mean
school.
right now as in?
This summer, we are taking care of those
But
projects.
out of this year's budget or next year's budget that starts July?
Out of this year's budget. But know that we are talking about and this is our challenge, is projects that we don't get funded get rolled to the next fiscal year.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
But the field house, the Riverdale boiler, the Dogwood ADA, those are things, and the security are things that we're asking for next year.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's, so that fiscal year 18, those things are on that list. We're talking, when we talk about those things, we're talking about what Patrick's talking about as his fiscal year 19. I just want
Correct.
to make sure we're
So those
very
are-
clear that
that's
those are
right.
the things that we're,
That's correct. Those projects that the board identified as their three main priorities are not getting completed in this fiscal year 18.
And-
We are asking for assistance with fiscal year 19
and
support
maybe
of
just
those
recap
projects.
those real quick. Which
Yes.
were those three?
So those are the security upgrades at all schools,
Right?
the Riverdale boiler and chiller, and the Dogwood ADA upgrades. So
Okay.
those were the ones that we were asking for assistance for.
In addition to the field house as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then just to clarify what Patrick had said, is that of this, 1.5 is included of half of the boiler because of timing, and that as we go along in our 5-year plan, the other half would be the fiscal year 20. And then The 200,000 for the field house. But
200,000 for the field
But the
house.
500,000 for the security upgrades and the 600,000 for the Dogwood ADA are not included from a funding from a city perspective. Just want to make sure we're all clear on that.
Right.
Okay, so,
Okay, so yeah, pass those down so you can see that.
and so that's something that we need to talk about because security is very,
Yes, and know that for us, we know that this was just, at the time, it was a stab in the dark, that our board talked about just putting $100,000 towards each school for increases in security. We have done safety walks with Lieutenant Shield. We also have Homeland Security that's doing an analysis with us that, and we're gonna talk about, I'm stealing our thunder, we're gonna talk about that briefly. But know that there are some potential grants out there, but know that we have done that analysis. This number will change. So I do want to say, this is just a placeholder.
right, but that's not in anyone's budget.
That's correct.
To cover that.
That's correct.
That's not money that we have set aside for security or for the Dogwood ADA.
That's correct.
Okay.
What's the number you're actually projecting for
For this-
ceiling?
For this fiscal year. Now, this is one thing, and so Jason, I'll go ahead and talk about. what
No,
we-
before your ceiling on your
For
security.
ceiling tile and grid, Mr. Kathy, was it,
Yes, sir.
what was the total cost ceiling tile and grid at Farmington?
Just around $500,000. That also
For your
included
security
LED.
upgrade.
Oh, security
I'm looking at a
upgrade.
max number. What are you projecting? So we've got $500,000 here, but Ms. Shields, what's it actually gonna take to get the security upgrade?
I've got it. So we identified $236,000 in camera upgrades at our school, so that's one component. We have an architect who's doing analysis right now at Houston High School. So we need to change the entrance. People get buzzed right into the lobby. So we don't know an exact cost, but know that we need to connect the two buildings. So we need to put fencing between the A building and the main building, and we want to cut a door where there's currently a window in the building so people get buzzed directly into the office instead of the lobby. The other two big costs that we're looking at, and Riverdale's exceptional because we just built that new entrance for it, but know that in Dogwood and Houston Middle School, we have the same issues. People get buzzed into the hallways, and so they would have access to students. So we were talking about building a structure where parents are buzzed into a desk and then get buzzed into the school. So the reason we don't have an exact cost yet is we're engaging an architect firm to design essentially a box with a desk to buzz in individuals. So
I just want a range. I mean, if it's 10 million, I want somebody to say, well, it could be 10 million. If you think it's less than 5, if we could just get a range of where we're going with these security upgrades in the future. And it could be a best case scenario, in your opinion, whatever you think. I could completely build the best security system in the country, and it would cost me X number of dollars. I'd like to start there, and then start trying to decide where we can go from that number. That's what I'm looking for. Is that fair? School board?
Well, hold on, staff, collectively staff, that's gonna be part of agenda item 4. They're working with Homeland Security, working with the state, there's federal money as well. This is all very fluid. It would be hard to press staff on, give us a range. The range could be from $1 to 10 million, as you mentioned. So
Have you been given a
it
number?
would, no, there is no number yet. So only thing we know that there's federal grants out there and there's state grants. Jason, does that conclude your
I think we're almost,
presentation?
yeah, that's the end
So
of it.
Jason Heisman and Jason Manuel, are y'all tag teaming part 3?
I'll take the lead. So,
Go ahead.
I think one of the things that we were excited about was that the city said they're going to look at our 5-year plan and try to come up with the administration a way looking at their bonding capacity, say, how can we accomplish all of these projects in the next 5 years? That was the objective that we sat down to the table and said, what can we accomplish? Now, I know
Remember the backdrop on this. This is 30 to 50-year-old buildings that have been deferred for years and years and years, close to what, 26 or
yes,
7
and we
million
inherited
dollars.
$26 million and
We want to compress it into 5 years, preferably. Go ahead.
Yes. So what they're looking at is our current funding sources. So know that if Shelby County continues their current funding, we receive about $1 million every year for capital improvements from Shelby County government. So that's money that we were taking into consideration. We also have built into our operations budget, our capital improvement budget out of our general fund, we have about 1.5 million. Now, there's 1.8, but we use 300,000 for debt payments on Riverdale. So money that's there to use, $1 million from county commission, we have 1.5 built into our budget. Every year, there's about 2.5 million built into our budget. So I think what Mr. Heisman was looking at was, if we take all these lists and there's a total each year, each fiscal year under each one, how much it costs, what they were trying to look at is where would the city have to come in and support us because we couldn't accomplish all those things, so I don't know if that,
You hit the nail right on the head. Our General Services Director, Reynold Douglas, and I met with Mr. Cathy and Mr. Emmanuel, and that's essentially what our goal was to do, is to identify not just a one-year request of, we need 3 projects. Let's look at the bigger picture. Let's figure out on the front end how we can integrate the school needs into our 5-year planning model. And so what we were able to do is look at every project that's listed, that's identified by GMSD Facilities Committee, and the amounts that are listed there, and then break it out by where can the money come from? The city, the school's budget of 2.5, we have private donors that are on some of these projects that are listed, and these projects that are listed are the total amount.
right.
What we got down to was that if we could use that 2.5 over the 5-year period of time, where does the city have to fill in those gaps? And the projects that we identified were the unplanned $3 million at Riverdale, the potential of the addition at the middle school. After that, there's roughly $12 million over the 5 years, but the 2.5 spread out over that period of time. If our goal was to keep the school on track. In light of the 70 million that we have, and we have to spread out and plan for the 5 years, what we, tasked by the mayor to be able to do this, was what can we do to keep the school district on task with that, or on track with that 2.5 million. So those are the 2 major projects that we identified, in addition to the 200,000 for the field house.
Was there anything spent this year as we're finishing up of the 2.5 million?
For this
this current year,
yes,
right,
for
it's
fiscal year
ending
18, so
the end of
yes.
this month?
So the project that we just talked about, the Houston High School painting
Yeah.
and farm, what the board,
Yes,
what the
yeah.
board approved, because all these are
Yeah,
over,
yeah, yeah.
and the ceiling tile and grid, those projects are out of this fiscal year's budget. So those other projects have to roll to the next fiscal year's budget.
Okay. That's over.
Yes, but the projects that the board had discussed and identified,
Mhm.
the security, the ADA upgrades in Riverdale, those weren't funded. They're, like you talked about earlier, those aren't in this current fiscal year. We would have to take those out of our next fiscal year's budget.
Like our bathroom upgrades that we
Yes.
had hoped to do, just start this year, will
Yes.
not get done, that would have to get pushed.
That's correct.
Well, let's go to public safety quickly. I'm not sure which chief is going to.
I'll start off.
Chief Hall.
First of all, I brought backup with me, and if you don't know Lieutenant Brandon Shield, he also served on our SWAT team. He is assigned to serve all of our schools directly. In fact, his office is in GMSD, and he directly supervises our 8 school resource officers and our crossing guards. To my left, Deputy Chief Rodney Bright is an expert on grants, and he's over all operations, both SWAT and investigative and police services. I'm actually going to ask Rodney to start off because the question that came that we did assessments with the school, and now they've come out with new. I don't want to steal his thunder. Go ahead.
Well, there's just a little history. I mean, we, since 1999, I've been personally involved in trying to make sure we have a safe environment for our kids, our staff, and our schools. And, going back to Columbine, that was obviously a tragic game changer for us. So I worked with my counterparts at FBI, and we held the first ever active shooter training for multi-agency response at Houston High School back in 1999. So this is something that's been near and dear to our heart, and it's important to us for a long time. So nothing's more important than providing a safe environment for the kids and the staff that work at our school. So with Chief Hall, as we look to create our own school district, worked on the front end with the sheriff at the time and talked about what we were doing and what would that mean in the future. The partnerships that we have, we share resources at Houston High School and Germantown High. We made the decision early on to maintain and stay the course. So they are our partner at Houston High School. The sheriff's department's still there. They're a partner at Germantown High School, in addition to some other staff that they added. So our goal has always been, our role in the schools is very specific. It's clearly defined for our school officers. Number one is safety. And then we get in there, we develop relationship with kids, and we provide training, education for kids and staff. So, as y'all know, we're in a really different time with safety in our schools and other places. So, you know, we're constantly evaluating how we do our job. You know, the unfortunate part of it is our job is really reactive. You know, so our best case scenario, we plan for the worst case scenario in everything we do. Schools are no different. However, our best case scenario is after the worst case scenarios happen, right? So we work hard to do everything we can with people, with engineering and infrastructure and mechanical things that help keep our schools safe. So Lieutenant Shield, we've done site assessments at our buildings already. We've done that early on. We've done a comprehensive look at how we would respond in vulnerable areas. And we've trained since 1999. And now, you know, we've had a couple of other events. So, you know, Columbine was a game changer in my business, in our business. And the most recent things, I believe, also changed the way we need to approach problems. And just my message to our staff, just every second matters. Every second matters. That's why we're in the schools. You know, we know that through what we do, if there's an event to occur, that law enforcement intervention changes behavior. We're going to interrupt whatever's going on, right? So we want to get to the problem as soon as possible. Now, I'm not even talking about all the planning and all the training and the rehearsing and all that we do prior to. And we do, we're just part of the public safety process. You know, it's really the students and parents and teachers that we partner with for early identification. That's not part of my spiel, but it's something that's important to me. But so, it obviously costs money to make the schools harder to penetrate for people that have bad plans. So, we met last week with Mr. Heisman and Mr. Manuel and Mr. Kathy, and we're looking at, you know, they've gone around and done additional site assessments as required by Tennessee Homeland Security. The governor's going to release some money. That's not really, you know, my area of expertise, but, you know, we're doing the things already. We've done them. We've already been to the training that's required to make us eligible. The school system has done the same. So we're waiting for them to explain the process of applying and all that. Y'all know it's early, get the information out, and then, you know, working out how we get through the process. So we're going to do everything we can to support the school system with people and training and resources, and I'm proud of it, but I'm also disappointed that our program where we go out and educate people on what to do in some kind of critical incident, the request for that has exploded. And I believe we're really good at that. We present it in a different way, working with the fire department. So we'll continue to do that. And
You're talking about active shooter.
Active shooter, and again, you know, for us, every second match, these are in bed with GMSD. I think we're very unique in that way, and it's been a fantastic partnership, and you know, and we also take care of the 3Gs as well. So, you know, nothing has we present the same programs to them, and we provide the same services. So.
Thank you, Chief. Jason Main, are we any closer? Do we have advocacy? Our lobbyist is working to get us information on the Department of Education grants. So we haven't.
We're waiting on, they're supposed to release the rubric. So we've completed the assessments we've gone through, and actually Lieutenant Shield has actually went to the training with Homeland Security people to talk about how do we apply for it. So the second it comes online, we don't know a timeline yet, but we know, was it 32 million that was released?
30.2.
Yeah.
Now, there's also, I met with our congressman last week, David Kustoff, and we inquired if there's any federal money, and I sent it to you guys. It's HR Bill 4909, it'll be $75 million. So we need to work collectively, and we do have a grant writer, but that's all she does. So
And we actually
when that
met
occurs,
with Miss Alexa, so we're hoping that
So
the second they
what's
come
the typical
online.
timeline of that? I mean, because right now we're sitting with unsecured buildings. We're sitting with open walkways into schools. We have cameras that aren't working. We have areas that don't have cameras. How long could this process take
The
before we know
governor-
how much the money
The
is?
governor put it in his budget, and it was adopted quickly. I think you guys who work with the professionals more than the electeds do, this seems to be being fast-tracked, in my opinion. The training's already occurred during the summer session while school is out. You guys are already poised and ready. You guys have been trained as the ops folks.
Trained to fill out, to request the money, or trained to handle situations?
Well, I was not part of that. I'm assuming, Josh, you guys were, the training for the district was on the ops side.
Yes.
Right.
And the professional
Yes.
training on
And
interventions over
I
here.
don't disagree. I
Let
mean,
me speak
I
a
think
little
we're
bit.
very clear. I mean, I think y'all do an excellent
Right.
job, to
And
your
I-
point.
I'll let you know that I'll do everything I can within my powers to assist the schools on the grant. As a matter of
Right.
fact, the new director of COPS grants is Phil Keith, who was a 17-year chief with Knoxville, Tennessee Police Department. I met with him last Thursday evening, talking up the school security. We're going to need a new SRO coming around the next school. It'd be great if we can get the federal funding to pay for that. We're going to do everything we can. But let's not lose the fact that unless you harden a facility, and that means put in a bag check and put in people going through magnetometers, you won't have the complete security. What we can do is make it where a stranger can't
That's
come in.
right.
But, and you're talking about, some countries do that, but you're going to back your time up from 2 hours getting through there on bag checks and everything. And, we see that not dissimilar than TSA. And people made the decision, yeah, we want that type of security. So it could come to that. We're going to do everything we can to help.
Well, Chief, I have a quick question for you. So I think the training's on point. I trust our officers 100%, so I don't think that's where we necessarily have to look for more money. But in the environmental design, which is what you're talking about, that's the issue here. And so what I'm looking for as an alderman is that number, is what do we need from a budget standpoint to make those changes to our environment to help make sure that we lessen the opportunity for someone to get in our school and create a situation for us that our officers have to respond to. Because what I want to do is prevent those officers from ever having to respond, and we have to do that through our environmental design, which is exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So how do we get that? We can make a couple of phone calls and find out how much it costs to get a dog, how much it costs to get cameras, how much it costs to get.
I would say you
grass.
have to go back, and I'm not a contractor, and I don't want to get into areas not mine or our expertise, but a lot of schools that I feel like are, in my opinion, safer, have fencing all the way around it. You can't come in and go from the back. Like I know I have a problem with a lot of schools because the parents want to pick up behind
That's
these
right.
schools
That's right.
rather than get in the line. That right there, you've got to start with the mental concept of some people are going to be inconvenienced. And I see schools that once everybody's in, they shut it down and you come through a guard and come in there. That's the very first step. Now, I'm again getting way outside, but you're talking about contracting, and I'd get lost in those numbers.
Have there been any talks about actually better securing our entrances? Are you having those discussions?
And I think
with
that's
the-
what you're
Yes.
saying.
The
that the-
superintendent
Yes.
right now has an architect looking at what the cost.
So what would be the
to-
timeline of that?
So first step is, I know Mr. Cathy already had
I
the
can
meeting with
speak
the
to that
architect.
if you'd like, Mr. Manuel.
Please do.
I've been instructed by the superintendent to treat Houston High School as the priority, especially with the front entrance and
Connecting the two buildings.
and connecting the two buildings. We have an annex building and a main building. The doors remain open during the days they have to in order for students and staff to be able to pass. So what we're looking at right now is creating a front entrance that, very similar to Riverdale and our other schools, the front entrances are open until arrival is complete, and then that locks down and everything is forced through a main office. At Houston High School, we're looking at putting in an additional door that goes directly into the office so that any visitor that comes in would have to check in. We're also looking at putting decorative/security fencing, similar to what we did at Riverdale in the courtyard, for those of you who've seen it, where that was an open space concept, and now it's still open, but it's closed off by fencing. It takes time. You have to go through the fire marshal's office. You also have to go through our local fire marshal. You have to do a life safety plan. You have to look at how many points of egress you have to have from the inside. So they take time, but we're looking at those things. It would be irresponsible of me to throw out a number at this point because we're at the very, very, very rudimentary planning phase of the process.
But knowing what you do as you go through this, what would be your time, like just the time to know? Like when would you anticipate saying, this is everything that we would need? Not everything, but within a reasonable fencing, the environmental basically.
At Houston High School, I would say it would be reasonable to have a good solid number once we've gone through the whole process. The only real number that we have right now is cameras.
But how long does that process take is what I'm trying to.
It depends on how quickly we go through it with the planning. I don't want to throw out wrong numbers or wrong timelines. I don't think that'd be responsible of me.
So a year?
No, my goal
No.
is to, as the school year is starting, that Houston
Okay.
High School is first
Okay.
on, if that's what
Okay.
you're asking.
Yes.
That's one of my objectives for this.
Within the next 2 to 3 months,
Yes.
we should have
Is
a
it-
good feel.
First step is Houston High School, and then we're moving to the middle school and then elementary, yeah.
And so if that's, so would it be fair, because it sounds like there's a lot going on. We have the grant work that we're doing, we have a lot of things are in motion. And this is a very significant topic that I think both of these boards needs to be involved in talking about. Would it be fair to say that we should all come back together again and discuss as 2 boards what our safety plan is? Because then if it does take more money, if the grant money's not there, or if it's, we only been able to get half of it, what do we do and can we come up with a plan together? I think that would give a lot of comfort for me as a board member, knowing that safety is number one and we don't have any money in either of our budgets for that.
I would go back to what we talked about at FAC, is that the priority on how you spend as a board those monies is
What
directly,
monies?
the monies that you have, that GMSD has.
From what?
The 2.5, the million from Turtle
Right.
County Commission, and 1.5
Yes.
that we have.
That the school board dictates how that money is spent. And so if something were to need to be shifted, then that is at the board's power. And so I have no problem coming back together, but I think that y'all have those tools to be able to make those decisions. If monies are needed when we come back in 60 to 90 days, if monies are needed, that certainly, I believe from Mr. Heisman and Superintendent Aniel, we're going to be having those conversations.
Yeah, let me
It's
go
not
ahead.
going to be-
We're up against the hour. I will just kind of close with this. The city has long had a priority of public safety. We have 3 new officers in this budget. We provide all the SROs. We provide a new SRO for the new school, crossing guards, et cetera, et cetera. So we stand poised to be able to help. So professional public servants will be working through this summer, and we're ready to be a great partner, as we always have been.
And y'all have been great partners, but before we end here, I would like to make sure, because we haven't sat down as these 2 boards together in almost a year and a half. And I think it's extremely important for us to look across the table and make sure everybody's on the same page, because I think our FAC process is a wonderful process. But I don't necessarily know that our presentations that are made to the FAC make it to each individual alderman. And I think it's important for each of them to understand what our needs are. So I
Well,
would
the
say.
FAC meetings are open to the public.
They
Anybody
are,
can
but I
go.
don't know that all aldermen make it. I'm talking about the aldermen.
That's their choice.
I don't disagree, Mayor, but I do believe that these dialogues are
Sure.
extremely important.
That's why we've had about a half dozen or so in the last few years. So.
Well,
But
we've
we're not all
had
sitting
one,
together, and I
yeah,
think
we've
it's a
had
fair
one,
fight.
yeah, we've had
Well,
one in the last
each-
year and a
All of
half.
our boards are
agree.
not on at the same table, and
I
I think
think
that's
it's
important to
extremely
have that
important.
discussion. I tend to agree with
And
Ms.
what I would
Jones.
say is 2 things to just make note of, because I feel very strongly that we need to make sure all of our aldermen are very aware of this, is that one of the key things that our superintendent did a great job at the FAC meeting talking about is it's not only a CIP, not only a capital improvement, and I agree, we have $2.5 million, and we'll finagle and we'll always figure out, that's what our superintendent does, is figure out how to spend our money to keep our kids safe. But one of the things we don't need to lose sight of is 2 slides that he presented to us that I thought were extremely telling, is that when we open the doors of our new school in fiscal year 2019, we will have to increase our operating expenses by $2.8 million. That's general fund. That is not capital. That is everyday, ongoing operating. We are getting no more revenue from the state and from the county because those children are already sitting on top of each other in our schools. So our revenue is not going to increase. We are not a revenue generating body. So I don't want to lose sight of the fact that when we come to budget talks next year, I think the sooner we can include our school board in the general fund operating, we will need those monies. We're gonna have to figure it out. We can't, it's either that or we have to dig into our CIP and then there goes our plan for getting our deferred maintenance. The other thing I think would be very good to say is our superintendent does a great job of breaking out the optimal and maximum. It costs money to put less children in classrooms. And he did a great analysis of $1.2 million if we looked at our classrooms now. That's over and above the 2.8. So as our city and as our citizens are saying, we want less students in our classrooms, we want this new school, we want a new addition to Houston Middle, and we feel as a board that we need these, it does cost money, and I think the sooner we can start talking about where those funds would come from, again, district is not a revenue generating body, and we've already got the revenue we're gonna get, because we already have the majority of those students in our city, in our classroom. So I just wanna make sure that all of our aldermen have heard that and understand that that is something, especially for the next year, that we're really set up for. I just wanted to, sorry for the diatribe, but I just think it's important that y'all hear that we're facing about $4 million if we really want to hit excellence in our classrooms.
And these last 2 points have been incredibly important. What she just said, and also the security. I mean, it's paramount that we get as much information as we can as soon as possible, with state, federal, grants, what have you, and what monies that we might have to, but we have to come up with a number. And that number, we need to get back together and work all this out. We just can't wait. We've got to be proactive. And going after the safety issue particularly.
I think it's a
Then
great
I would
idea.
say let's reconvene in 60 days.
I was going to suggest
That's a
those.
great idea. And
And then
then
we'll work, the superintendent and I will work with the mayor, Mr. Lawton, set up.
And just to make sure we're clear, because we have a zoning issue about this, is just what you had said, Mr. Lawton, about the fact that the Houston Middle Edition, that in your current outlook, and you know, it's just an outlook, right? But for that fiscal year 2020, which would be the fall of 2019,
They could go
we would
bond.
be looking to bond, so that if we in our head start talking about looking at an addition and get that ball rolling and start talking to that would fit in with your timeline.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it does matter because we're in the middle
Well,
of.
absolutely, absolutely.
Because and it does
We have to
matter,
make a
we have to
decision.
make,
Yes,
we have to make
yes.
a matter, a decision based on zoning in the next few
That's a good
months.
point.
And so we
It's-
really do need to know if that's there because it will affect how we make a decision to rezone.
The
But
BMA
y'all don't vote
approves
on next year's
funding
budget though, right?
1 year at
Yeah.
a time, but we do,
Yeah.
again, we do that 6-year CIP, and so we know pretty much where we are.
Okay, thank you.
But the intent is to put it in FY20, July 1, 2019.
Thank you,
So
Mr.
that's
Lawton.
it.
Thank you for everyone's participation.
Thank
Yeah,
y'all
thanks,
very
Silver.
much, thank you.